Have you heard about the term gear acquisition syndrome, also commonly known as GAS? It's a phenomenon that affects street photographers at all levels, and it starts innocently enough with the desire to master your craft. You think maybe this new camera will help you capture those elusive street shots, or that lens might make everything seem cinematic, and before you know it, you're knee-deep in a sea of lenses, camera accessories, and various filters, and when you do a quick tally, you already spent 10K. I hadn't heard about this specific term until recently, but I had all the symptoms as I mentioned before. I had the unrelenting urge to own and buy camera gear as a catalyst or maybe an excuse in the pursuit of creative energy and bringer of happiness. Boy, was I wrong. Today I'd like to talk about a few specific pieces of camera gear that you probably don't need when doing street photography. As most of us are hobby street photographers, the likelihood of us needing a top-of-the-line camera or lens might just be overkill. For every piece of gear I mentioned in this video, I'll try to give you another perspective to consider, so you're better informed the next time you think about buying an expensive piece of gear that you might end up not needing after all. First of all, fast prime lenses are expensive, and you pay a premium to get that 1.2 or 1.4 aperture. And yet most of us, we still dream of owning one. In most cases, and especially street photography, opening wide up is not strictly necessary, so let's say to 1.4 or 1.8. But large apertures are really great for stylized work, shots, or even portraits, where that blurry background, subject separation, and bokeh is needed. And even for portraits, I would say needing a fast prime lens like the 1.2 is not strictly needed as well. But if you hover around 2.8, you can get a decent amount of blurry background, shallow depth of field, and dreamy bokeh. I'm not disregarding large apertures entirely. I've been guilty of it myself. I love that shallow depth of field, blurry background, and subject separation. Nowadays, I only use my fast prime lenses as part of stylized work where subject separation, blurry background, and bokeh is needed. So for example, for high contrast photos, silhouette photography, or even night street photography. So let me give you an example. So back in 2022, I bought the brand new Sigma 24mm 1.4 art lens, and it cost me around $1,000. So this is basically the most expensive lens that I have in my street kit. And back then I had the desire or maybe an idea of that I wanted to use that for architecture photography because I wanted that focal length. So 24mm is quite wide. And back then I only had the 35. And when I was doing architecture photography, that wasn't wide enough. And I also got in my head that I wanted 1.4 to get those really pin sharp photographs. But now I really come to understand that 1.4 is really not needed, especially when you're doing architecture photography, because you want more of that architecture or building in focus. So me buying a 1.4 was not really necessary. It was actually a waste of my money because I hardly use it for architecture photography anymore. And even though that Sigma lens is super sharp and is probably worth all the money, but my need has actually changed a lot, and I also come to understand what my need actually is. So I actually could have gone with a much cheaper 24mm focal length instead of buying the Sigma. But nevertheless, I found a purpose for that Sigma lens, which is I record all my videos on that 24mm focal length. If you're thinking about buying a fast prime lens like the 1.2 or 1.4, I would urge you to reconsider and trying out the smaller apertures like f5.6 or f8 and try to stay there. Because with the smaller apertures, you're able to capture the essence of a scene with the subjects and that context. And you also want to have as much in focus as possible to also have that environment as part of your storytelling. You don't need the latest flagship camera from your favorite brand. There are so many options to choose from that it can be very difficult to decide on a new camera in the first place. And the one thing most street photographers debate with themselves is to buy a full frame or a crop sensor. When talking about a full frame sensor versus a crop sensor, I would still say as a hobby street photographer, you don't need a full frame sensor to do street photography. And there's also a significant barrier to entry to consider when buying a full frame camera. A camera with a full frame sensor is great for low light situations, or if you like to do night street photography and studio work where you need the higher resolution that the larger sensors offer. Then it makes absolutely sense to buy a full frame camera. Crop camera sensors are a great alternative to their full frame counterparts, and so many camera brands nowadays are making very affordable and capable crop sensor cameras that has features and functions on par with the more expensive ones. When I was just getting into street photography years ago, I remember all the rage about a very specific camera, and that was the Sony a7 III. It was this very small mirrorless full frame camera that everybody was just raving about. I also remember that being in two minds about whether to buy a full frame camera or a crop sensor camera, and actually I ended up buying a crop sensor camera because I didn't actually know if I liked street photography back then. and I didn't want to invest a lot of money into a full frame camera that I probably didn't even know how to use. So I'm really happy that I made a good decision back then. Here are a few things to consider if you're thinking about buying a full frame camera. So basically it comes down to need to have versus nice to have. So be really mindful and critical of your current need at your current skill level. It's very easy to get blinded by all the features that the more expensive option offers. Do you really need that specific feature or function? Are they really worth the cost? So do the simple exercise of pros and cons of your need versus your willingness to pay for that feature or function. There's so many filters to choose from. There are UV filters, ND filters, polarizers, black mist filters, white mist filters, and I could go on. And they also come in different shapes, so basically linear or circular. And the most common ones are the screw-on filters. So basically you mount the filter directly on your lens. Freewell kindly sent me their latest kit of magnetic filters. So this kit is called the M2 Magnetic Quick Swap 5-pack. And this kit contains 5 filters, and 3 of them are neutral density with different strengths, so 8, 64, and 1000. In the kit you also get a lens cap and this step-up looking ring. So the way you use the magnetic filters is that you use this and put it directly on your lens, and from there you pick your favorite filter and snap it on, and because it's magnetic, it's super simple. All the filters that I mentioned so far serve a very specific but different purpose. So let me give you a quick rundown. Let's start with a UV filter. So a UV filter is commonly used as an extra layer protection for the lens in case you hit or drop the lens. Polarizers are best to shoot landscapes as they darken the sky and makes the colors pop. And they're also really good at eliminating glare and reflections, especially on water and glass surfaces. ND or neutral density filters are often referred to as sunglasses for the camera, as they reduce the amount of light coming into the sensor. This is measured in stops, so this way you can shoot with larger apertures and lower shutter speeds in broad daylight. Essentially there are 2 types of ND filters, the fixed and the variable. In this kit from Freewell you get the fixed that covers a broad range. So you have the ND8, which is 3 stops of light, you have the ND64, which is 6 stops of light, and then you have the ND1000, which is 10 stops of light. The other type is called variable ND, so basically they come in different stops. You can get 2 to 5 stop or 6 to 10. And the good thing about variable NDs are that you can rotate them to block the amount of light you need. I have my very expensive Polar Pro VND that I only use for filming these days. Then we have the stylized filters. So I have black mist filters for both my cameras, and I've been using black mist filters for years, and I really like that dreamy, hazy, cinematic look that it gives to my photos, whether I'm doing night street photography or day street photography. And a good tip here is to buy the largest thread size. So if you have a lens that is 82, then I would buy the 82. And for my Fuji, I have a dedicated 49mm, and that also functions as weather sealing for the camera. Here are a few things to consider if you're thinking about adding a filter to your street photography kit. To be honest, I don't think it's strictly necessary to add a filter if you're just starting out. It's more important that you understand what kind of street photography you want to do and what kind of style you like. And once you have that understanding, it will be so much easier for you to pick up that specific filter. But if I have to give you a recommendation, I would say pick up a VND because it is multi-purpose. You can both use it for street photography, but you can also use it for video. If you're still not convinced, then you can consider buying a kit because that way you will get the most essential filters, and that way you won't break the bank either in the process. Alright, up next are camera bags. So camera bags are considered a staple in every street photographer's kit. They allow us to carry our precious gear from point A to B securely. But I don't believe that you need a dedicated camera bag in order to do street photography, because dedicated camera bags are often big, impractical, not super comfortable, and very expensive. And people with bad intention can easily spot you a mile away that you're carrying all that expensive gear. I have a total of 3 camera bags, all from different brands, sizes, and shapes. But there is only one camera bag that I truly love and use every day, and that is the Wandered Rogue 3 liter. I love how small this camera bag is, and I can carry all the essentials with me. And sometimes I wish I bought the 6-liter, but then I have to remind myself that if I bought the 6-liter, I would just stuff it with additional camera gear that I actually don't need. So this way, I only carry the essentials with the 3-liter. The next dedicated camera bag I want to talk about is also from Wandered. It's called the Provoke 21, so 21 liters. And I can tell you how many times I've used it since I bought it. Exactly 1 time. And I have the same reasons as I mentioned before. It's big, it's impractical, and I'm super comfortable when it's stuffed with my gear. And the one time I need to carry all my camera gear, it's perfect. But for the type of street photography I'm currently doing, I don't need all that camera gear with me. I only need the essentials. The last dedicated camera bag I want to talk about is actually the first one I bought, and it's from Low Pro. And it's really compact and has a good size that really fits me. But I have the same reasons for not using that camera bag that I already mentioned. Here are a few things to consider when you're thinking about buying a dedicated camera bag. Again, depending on your need, I would just consider buying an inexpensive camera bag just to hold your essentials. So basically what you need to go out and do street photography. These days, I only carry my camera and a lens of choice. That's it. Gear acquisition syndrome is very real, and it has costed me a lot of money over the years. So I hope in this video I gave you another perspective to consider before you go out and buy that expensive gear that you might not need. Alright, I'll see you in the next one.